based on acres. And this is basically clustering forested, clustering shrub scrub, has a loss and some loss of emergent as well. And the gain of wetlands is all this PUD X class, is basically excavated ponds or detention ponds. So a lot of those have been created in Lake County. If you do it by wetland, number of wetlands rather than acres, basically what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of loss of these small emergent wetlands. 465 we've lost of emergent wetlands in Lake County. And we have a huge gain in this, basically backyard ponds, detention ponds, things like that. There's a big habitat value difference between the emergent class, a nice emergent class where the wetlands where there's vegetation, a lot of food available for ducks, waterfowl, and other critters, frogs, things like that, as opposed to these deep water detention ponds, which don't have a lot of habitat value. If you remember back to that original slide, one of the first ones I put up there was the breeding mallard habitat, where we could get kind of a picture of the density of breeding mallards. Using that same formula, we updated southern north part of Michigan recently, and basically what we did is we took that formula and reapplied it to that portion that we've already updated to find out what the changes are in the breeding mallard habitat. And with similar situation in Michigan as occurred in Lake counties, we've lost a lot of those emergent wetlands, we've gained a lot of those open water, backyard pond type areas. When we ran it through the formula, one of the important things in the formula is those emergent wetlands. Since there was a big loss of emergent wetlands, we've basically found out we've lost about 18,000 pairs of breeding mallards since the 70s. Michigan was in the 70s in that area of Michigan. And so it's basically been a loss of these emergent wetlands that we've seen. It's just been a big change in habitat for breeding mallards.
Are you using mallards because it's the most common duck species?
Yes, that's what we use. Mallards is kind of a species that's most common in this area, especially in the breeding area, breeding mallards. So for the timeline, what we're trying to do for Illinois, we got a state wildlife grant, as I mentioned before. We started in August of this year, past year, 2008. We're trying to get half the counties in Illinois done by June 2009, and then we're going to have the whole state done in July 2010. Hopefully with a final report in August 2010. All the data is sent back to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so right now we're trying to get all these counties we have done out to be field verified now. We'll continue to go on updating and sending out counties throughout this year and through next spring, kind of working our way through the state from north to south. You can go to our website as well and check out the National Wetlands Inventory Update. You can download the data in draft format if you want to for the counties. There's also a status map so you can see which counties we're working on and which counties have been updated so far. The web address for this, probably the easiest way to get to it is go to our official site, which is www.ducks.org. When you get there, just type NWI in the search bar and it'll come up to this page. This is just a status map. If you click on that status map, you can you'll come to this page, and basically it shows you which counties we have done already, which is this color and the dark colors, the counties that we're currently working on. We got a head start on Indiana and Ohio. We've been working on that for about a year and a half now, and we're scheduled to complete those two states by August of this year. So, I have a lot more work to do in Illinois. Now we're going to switch gears just a little bit and go more into the field assessment, what we want to do with the field assessment. Does anybody have any general question on kind of the background, why we're doing this, why it's important?
Are you Chen?
I actually do. I wonder if you could just talk about what are some of the outcomes for wildlife, the good outcomes for wildlife that could come about from knowing all this information.
Sure. The big thing for this is for us to, well, I guess a couple different things. One is in our conservation planning. In order to figure out where we want to do restoration efforts and where the best place to do wetland restoration areas, we have to know where the current wetlands are and which ones have been drained so we can kind of target those wetlands that are close to you, wetlands that are currently there, so we can kind of build complexes of wetlands for wildlife. If you just go out and restore a wetland out in the middle of nowhere, so to speak, with no other wetlands around it, you can't build on kind of a complex of wetlands for wildlife, so it'll be kind of an isolated wetland, which will be good for some wildlife species, but it'd be a lot better if you build that wetland next to other wetlands, so you can build on a complex of wetlands for benefit of more species of wildlife. Second thing is kind of a public relations, public policy thing. If we can build support based on this kind of information on all these losses of wetlands and wetlands where there's where we've lost wetlands, we can take that to state legislators and federal legislators to build in funds in order to do wetland restoration projects. We do more restorations, to provide that funding for state agencies, local watershed groups to do the wetland restoration. There's a lot of local watershed groups out there that are interested in wetlands. In order to do that, in order to get funding for those groups through the EPA, they have to have some kind of watershed plan. And in that plan, they need to know where the wetlands are and where potential wetland restoration projects could be. Kind of feeds directly into this kind of analysis.
Does that also apply to private property owners who are restoring wetlands on their?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of different resources for private landowners. The Fish and Wildlife Service has a Partners for Wildlife program that helps out with restoration efforts. The NRCS has different programs to help fund those kinds of things. DU does fund kind of partners with those different federal and state agencies in order to do restoration projects. If you are interested in having a wetland restoration done, there are a lot of avenues for funding to help you get that done as well. Yeah.
Are you aware of any associated work to identify water sources for wetlands, like critical recharge areas?
No, I'm not that familiar with that. Can you explain more water?
Well, in
recharge
other
areas?
words, with, for instance, wetlands can be, the water source can be aquifers, shallow aquifers. So
Right.
those associated recharge areas, the health of those systems and how they're feeding in other words, identifying the flows into the wetlands.
Okay.
Those areas are protected, the highlands that feed it.
Right. There's, I don't know in Illinois, but in Michigan, there's work going on in the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality. There's this wetland functional assessment that I was talking about before. And they're also working with our fisheries guy that's done basically an aquifer map of Michigan that has basically ground, I don't know if it's aquifer, it's more groundwater map of Michigan, so they can tell where the water's coming from, if it's going into the ground, if it's coming out of the ground, kind of a through flow inputs. That's kind of all part of the functional assessment of those wetlands. So the DEQ is actually taking our updated wetlands inventory and then assigning functions to them based on the water flow. Is it recharging the water, groundwater, or is it actually coming out of the groundwater? Things like that. I don't know a lot about that study, but that's about as much as I know.
Thank you.
But it is being used for those kinds of activities as well. Yeah.
I have a question on in the sense of trying to reclaim wetlands that have been turned into ag or whatever.
Right.
What type of response have you been getting from the property owners? I mean, farmers and such, grazers, whatever. I mean, are they willing to work with you, or do you find them being standoffish, or?
It kind of ranges the whole gambit. Ducks Unlimited has had a really good relationship with farmers in the past, and I think we'll continue to have a really good relationship with them as well in the future. And basically, it's just a lot of education and going and talking to them. A lot of farmers, there's a lot of farmers that have, especially I'm more familiar with Michigan, but in Saginaw Bay region, it's been basically, it used to be all wetland, it's all been diked, drain tile, these big ditches going through. And so a lot of those are prime farmland, but we're not going to restore back into a wetland because it's being farmed now. But there are a lot of farmers that have kind of a marginal area where there's, they farm it 2 or 3 times out of the year. The other times it's just too wet to farm. And so they're not really getting any productivity out of that. And so we've had really good success working with farmers in those areas in order to turn those marginal areas of farmland into